Back in 2013, I was moving from Florida to Kentucky for a new job with a close friend I grew up with. It's about a 15-hour drive, so we decided to leave around 6 p.m. and drive straight through to get to Kentucky the next morning. The route takes you through Atlanta, and then a long, dark stretch of mountains in Tennessee, where there are no exits, no cell service, and it's very steep. There's about an hour-long drive where there are signs everywhere that say, "No Jake brake," and "No braking downhill." While driving, it feels very dangerous going downhill, and this was in November, and the roads were very slick at night. It was about 3 a.m. I was driving, and my friend was in the passenger seat sleeping. We were coming down one of the mountains, and up ahead, I see a bright light that is slowly getting bigger as I approach. I realize what I am seeing is a car fully engulfed in flames, in the left lane at the bottom of the hill. I yell to my friend to wake up, so we can figure out what the hell to do. Obviously, if anyone is in the car, they could not have survived, and we were not equipped to help. It also seemed like a dangerous idea to stop the car, because it was at the bottom of the mountain, and we were worried we would be in danger from oncoming cars so late at night. As we are trying to figure out what to do, we realize neither of us have cell service, but we see a sign for a gas station 2 miles up the road. We get to the gas station and tell the guy working there about what had happened. He tells us that this, unfortunately, is something that happens from time to time, and that he would call a state trooper for us, so we could tell him what happened and give any information we could. Less than 10 minutes later, the trooper pulls up, and we tell him exactly what happened. But he's confused, because he came from the same direction, and it would have been impossible for him to miss a flaming car. After a few minutes of us basically arguing with him about what we saw, and assuring him we weren't on any drugs and had not been drinking, we travel south with him following us to the location of the accident. And sure enough, there is no burning car. There's no car at all. To this day, my friend and I are sure of what we saw. We passed within maybe 10 feet of the car, 1 lane over. But apparently, it never happened. I'm going to tell you a story about my dad, who passed away at home in 2014, just shy of his 93rd birthday. He was a lifer in the Army and had hundreds of stories, but only one like this. My dad, Don Baker, was a character and a half, larger than life. A big man with enormous presence and a booming laugh. Good-humored and loquacious, until a switch was flicked somewhere, and suddenly he was angry and dangerous. He married my mother when I was 6 years old, and I came to know both sides of him very well. Those were the only 2 sides he seemed to have, until he told me this story when I was in my early 20s. And for the first time I saw him uncertain, pensive, and apparently moved by something profound that he didn't understand. Eager to get away from the confines of his small Minnesota hometown, and what he called his Norsky family, he lied about his age to join the Army at 17 in 1938. Almost immediately, he was attached to the OSS and sent to China in the aftermath of the invasion of Shanghai by Japan, where he was tasked with gathering intelligence about the growing bloodshed in the area. After Pearl Harbor, he spent the first 2 years of the war as a paratrooper in the South Pacific, until he sustained injuries so severe that he was sent back stateside for hospitalization. After a couple of months in the hospital, he was deemed well enough to be discharged, but not fit enough to return to action, so he was attached to the 11th Airborne when it was activated at Camp Mackle in North Carolina, as one of a cadre of flyers and paratroopers who set up the division's jump school. While there, he and some of his fellow paratroopers began devising strategy for paratrooper recon, and that brings me to the story he told me. During the Korean War, and long since reassigned to intelligence. He was one of an elite chalk who jumped behind enemy lines to gather information and bring it back to the front, because troop movements and skirmishing meant that the front was always changing. Return routes were constantly being redrawn, and sometimes not quickly enough. Many of the paratroopers in the regiment lost their lives because of this inherent danger. On the way back to the front, and carrying extremely important information, my dad had made it from his recon position to a spot along the route about halfway home, when a brutal storm swept in during the late afternoon, and he had to seek shelter. There was a cave on the route that was behind him. He had to backtrack a short way to it. Once there, he said he just sort of had to hunker down and wait for the storm to pass. So he did what any soldier would do in that position. He grabbed some Z's. Sometime later, he was shaken awake by another member of his team who'd jumped a day or two before my dad. I can't remember his name, but he was one of my dad's good friends, so I'll just call him Buddy. The storm continued to rage outside, and Buddy said he had to risk moving through it quickly to get to my dad, because nearer to the front, the route Dad was on had been compromised. In the dim glow of a small flashlight, Buddy traced a map in the dirt of another route, a route that was as safe to follow as any behind enemy lines in a shooting war. And then he clapped Dad on the back and said, "You get yourself home in one piece, you sorry son of a bitch." He then said he had something else he had to do, ducked out of the cave, and was gone. Dad said Buddy had probably spent no more than 5 minutes with him in the cave. So Dad made it back to the front without incident in a couple of days. Once he'd dropped off the intelligence, he hit the mess and then his tent, and slept the deep sleep of the truly exhausted. When he awoke the next day and policed himself up, he went to the mess before going to his full debriefing and found a few more of his buddies having breakfast. They hailed him and told him how glad they were he'd made it back. He was a little taken by surprise at their enthusiasm and told them that they weren't going to shake him off anytime soon. They made small talk for a minute or two, and then Dad asked when Buddy had gotten in. The guys exchanged glances, and then one of them said, "Didn't make it, Bake." Dad, perplexed, looked from one guy to another and asked,
"What? He went out again already?"
And then Dad said it was the guys on the team that looked confused. "No, Don," one of them replied, shaking his head. "Buddy never made it back from the last jump." At this point, my dad began to get angry.
"That can't be possible,"
he declared to the others.
"I came back after him on the new route, and if anything had happened to him, I'd have seen evidence of it, of a fight or confrontation, or more activity. But the new route was as clean as a whistle, so quit bullshitting me, goddammit."
The other team members visibly stilled, he said, and the atmosphere was strained. After a few tense moments, the guy who'd been answering him leaned toward him and quietly but intently asked him, "What new route, Bake?" Flustered, irritated, and feeling a growing sense of unease, Dad responded,
"The new route that Buddy came back to tell me about. The route by the South Pass."
At that, the guys were completely stunned. The spokesman for the group, white-faced, shook his head. "That can't be, Don," he answered. 4 days ago, Buddy was killed on his way back from his last recon. He almost made it all the way back. One of our scouts was watching for him and saw the whole thing. The Reds went through his pockets and got the intelligence packet. Since that's where the maps are, including the one of the route you were both taking, we thought you were a goner. That's the story. When he'd finished talking, he fixed me with a grim smile and said,
"Buddy was there in that cave with me, as real as you are right now. He was there."
It was as if he was answering an argument from me, but of course he was talking to himself,
and by the time he got to me, he was dead already, by a day at least. If he hadn't come to me, to stop me from following the same route, to give me a new one, I'd be dead too. Sometimes I wonder if I dreamt it all, but damn it, the facts are facts. I got back by taking a route I didn't even know of, until that night I spent in the cave.
Hello. This is my first post and I'm on my mobile phone. I thought you all might like to hear something freaky that happened when my son, who's now 26, was 3 years old. I'm a nurse, and at the time, I was working 3 to 11 p.m. in a nursing home. I had been working there for several years. After my shift, I'd regularly come home and wake my son, steer him into the bathroom, stand him in front of the toilet, and tell him to pee. He was a very heavy sleeper and also a frequent sleepwalker, so he was never quite awake during these nightly pee sessions. I did this so he wouldn't pee the bed. One night I came home, steered him to the bathroom, and headed back into his bedroom to tuck him back in. As we got to the side of his bed, he popped his head up, opened his eyes, and in a deep voice said,
"So how's my brother Phil doing?"
I freaked out and stuffed him in his bed as fast as I could, and got the hell out of his room. He was an only child, and the only person I knew named Phil was one of the old men that I took care of at the nursing home. Back when I was in college, I had the most terrifying experience of my life. I mostly suppressed the memory until something reminded me of it, and now I can't stop thinking about it. Late at night, I would typically walk down a bike path to get to train tracks with my friend. We would sit on the tracks, watch the moon rise over the lake, and walk back. The last time I ever went to these tracks, something terrifying happened. To set the scene, the bike path was surrounded by old industrial buildings, mostly with no windows facing the path. There were very few streetlights. Our arms were linked, and I was on the right. Walking from the other direction was a man. Neither of us looked at him while he was walking towards us. As he was passing my friend to the left of me, I decided to glance at him. We instantly locked eyes, and I couldn't look away the entire time. I felt almost as if I was in some sort of trance. I felt like all the air had been sucked out of my lungs and my entire body tensed up. It wasn't until he passed us and looked away that I gasped for air and said, "Oh my God, what the fuck?"
"What happened? Are you okay?"
My friend said.
"I felt your whole body lock up."
"Did you look at him?" I asked. And she said,
"No."
It was at this point we turned around to look again. But before I finish the story, I need to explain what he looked like. As soon as we made eye contact, I noticed how horrifying he was. He was wearing a blue suit, a yellow shirt, and a red tie. His eyes were wide open, almost bulging, like glass eyes. His skin was white and waxy, and almost looked wet, sort of like porcelain. He had this disgusting grin on his face that I'll never be able to forget. His mouth was smiling so wide you could see all of his teeth. The only thing I can compare it to is a ventriloquist dummy. And as he stared at me, smiling, I felt like I had no control, and all the joy that I had inside me had been ripped out. As we looked back, he was still walking down the path away from us, except he was laughing and jumping, and the way he jumped was so unnatural, kind of like a puppet on strings. For some reason, I couldn't really explain to my friend what I had just seen. Mind you, at this time we were both around 21 years old. I was pretty athletic, and felt confident in my ability to protect myself and her. But I was so afraid. All I could do was ask her if we could please just run home. And we did. When we got back home, I was almost in a state of shock. I shakily explained to her what I saw, and she said she was sorry she didn't see him. And I replied, "You have no idea how thankful I am that you didn't." To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if we both had looked. I almost feel like if we didn't have our arms locked with her pulling me along, I would have had no control to keep walking away. I had nightmares about him for weeks, and couldn't bring myself to focus on anything else during my classes. Eventually, I blocked it out, until one night I was reminded of him. I'm posting this here because I have searched the internet, and haven't found any information about what he could have been, or what I might have seen. I just really feel like I stared into the face of evil, of someone who had done horrible things. I looked up ventriloquism, and have found some information about its potentially demonic roots, but haven't seen any testimony relating to mine. If anyone has any information or idea about what I might have seen, please let me know. This happened to me when I was 11 or 12 years old. We had a house fire and had to move in with my grandmother for a time, while the insurance was sorted out and our new house was built. Luckily, the land my grandmother owns had an old farmhouse near her own home that she mostly used for storage. It had water and electricity, so we were good to go. The first few nights in the house were very scary for me. Every little pop or flash of light made me think of the fire. I slept between my parents each night. It was rough, but after about 3 or 4 nights, I was no longer scared while I was in the house. I even started going upstairs in the evenings and reading in the loft while listening to the radio. I decided that I was able to sleep by myself in the house, and spent a few nights on the old couch in the living room. After that, I ended up in the loft using one of my cousin's sleeping bags. Anyway, the loft had a massive window facing the front yard, driveway, and the main road. I was just settling in for the night with my little lantern and my book, when something passed by the window. I shrugged it off as the reflection of a car going by, and kept reading. It happened again, and this time I got up and went to the window. Standing in the middle of the yard was a deer. It stood on its hind legs, and its neck was bent at an odd angle, like it was broken or something. It walked with a strange grace, especially for something that appeared to be so out of place, through the grass, across the road, and disappeared into the woods. At no point during seeing this creature was I afraid. I was actually very calm somehow, and even went to my sleeping bag and went back to my reading, not even thinking about what I had just seen. This is really out of character for me, to say the least. I'm the type to get worked up over seeing a bug in the house. The next morning I told my mother what I saw, and she seemed totally unaffected. She just told me not to tell anyone, and sent me off to school. I assumed she thought I was seeing things due to the stress of the fire, but I know exactly what I saw. I was not dreaming or even close to falling asleep when it happened. We moved to our new house about 3 weeks after I saw the Deerman. I've only told a few people about what happened, and I've never seen anything like that since, and I'm terrified of going into the woods. When I think back on it, it's super scary, and I have no idea why I was so calm that night. Okay, this is one that might not sound like as much of a big deal as it felt in the moment, but it's something I cannot forget. A few years ago, my wife and I were in Edinburgh, Scotland. For those who don't know, it's pretty quiet after dark, especially if you're more used to American big cities. We had a night with plenty of time to kill, so we decided to just explore the city a bit, and when we were ready to go back to our hotel, we'd get a taxi. We found ourselves on a street with very little lighting, and a lot of run-down old buildings, boarded-up windows, stores that had closed, etc. I remember being exhausted and hungry. It was around 2 a.m. I said to my wife something along the lines of, "I'm really hungry and getting tired. Want to maybe head back soon?" She said, "Sure. Do you want to try to find somewhere still open to eat?" I said I doubted anything would be open close by. And as soon as I said that, the lights came on in the building right in front of me. Big window shopping kind of display, with a small table and a couple chairs surrounding it. A cute little chandelier lighting it, tacky wallpaper, and a tea set and 2 plates of food on the table. The teacups and plates were steaming, like this is hot fresh food and tea I'm looking at, but no people inside. Then I also notice a sign that reads, "Tired? Come in, sit down, and have a hot cup of tea." I can't describe the feeling that place gave me except for absolute dread. That feeling when your heart sinks and all your hairs stand up, like every instinct in me was screaming danger. I didn't know why, but I grabbed my wife's hand and sprinted away, pulling her with me. We ran until we saw a taxi, and even though she could see I was really shaken up, she didn't say anything to me about it until we got back to the hotel. Then she asked why I had freaked out. I told her I didn't know. I just got really creeped out from that little tea shop when the lights came on, and panicked for some reason. She told me she didn't see any tea shop, or any lights come on. Just me staring at a boarded-up window. So I've been a career paramedic, but this happened when I had only been one for 5 years. This has never left me to this day, and I shit you not, it happened exactly like this. I was driving home on a rural highway one rainy afternoon. It was really pouring and traffic had slowed to about 50 miles per hour. I was following 2 vehicles, and we rounded a bend in the road as a small sports car on the opposite side crossed the center line and hit the small SUV that was leading us. I immediately pulled over and called 911. It was a bad one. I got out to check on everyone. There was wailing coming from the SUV on the side of the road. That's always a good thing, because people are breathing. So I went down into the field past the ditch to check on the sports car. There were 2 young guys in the car. The force of the impact had driven the engine to where the front passenger seat should be. The passenger was still buckled, his crumpled hand grabbing the oh shit handle overhead. The entire section of car shoved into the back seat area. The back of the car had peeled away, as had the top of the passenger's head. His jawbone jutted out, raw and jagged. He was clearly deceased, but I felt for a pulse anyway, all while listening to the gasping, ragged, dragging breaths of the driver. No pulse on the passenger, so I tried to figure out how to deal with the driver, but there was nothing I could do. The car had literally wrapped around him, and it would take an extrication team time to get him out. Listening to his dying breathing, I apologized out loud to him that I couldn't do more. Told him I was sorry to leave him, but others needed my help too. In my heart, I knew he'd never make it, so I went to render aid where it was needed. In triage, we call this black tagging a patient who isn't going to survive. I did what I could for the family in the SUV. Emergency medical people and fire services got to the scene and took over. The entire family had injuries, but all survived. The mother had permanent brain damage and lost an eye. But the whole day, those 2 guys in the red sports car stayed on my mind. That night, I was home alone and getting ready for bed, with just the bedside lamp on, and I heard something in the hallway. It got louder as it came closer toward my open door. It was like a thump, drag, thump, drag. I absolutely froze. A broken hand curled around the frame of my doorway. And then, that kid from the passenger seat was standing there, busted up, just like he was in the car. I'm totally serious. He looked at me, and I can't recall the exact words of what he said, but it was something along the lines of, "Hey, my friend wants you to know he understands. He wants you to know he's okay. We both are. Thanks for trying." He stood there for a few more seconds, just looking at me, and then he stepped back into the shadows, let go of the doorframe, and I listened to him drag back down the hallway into nothing. I turned on every damn light I could. I slept with the lights on for 2 full weeks. I clipped out their deaths from the paper later that week. Turns out they were both high school seniors on their way home from a wrestling tournament. Their car hydroplaned, from what the investigation determined. I'd never have recognized the blonde-headed kid had he come to me as his healthy, unwrecked self. Freaked me the hell out that he came to me busted up. I'll never forget them, nor the ghostly visit. Anyway, that's my experience. I've seen a lot of shit in my 29-year career, but nothing quite that visceral, before nor since. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. Links to my shit are down in the description. Follow me on social media and join my Discord. And I love you guys. I know I haven't been here for a minute, but every now and then I'll do something like this where I'm just like not interested in doing it. But I have a bunch of things coming soon. I got some creepypastas. I got a collab. I'm doing the first chapter of a book for my buddy. I did do a live stream the other day, so if you missed that, you could go check it out. I'm planning on doing more of those. And that's about it. And be good to animals, even people. Sip.
Scout, Snamok, Barksbus, Herish.
Slooch, it's an owl. It's an owl going, hoo, hoo, right? It's a bird. Good job. Are you protecting that daddy from the big scary owl? Huh? You tell him. Oh, yeah. Where are you going? Where are you going? Oh, you're going to get some water, I see. It's important to get some water when you're going to fight an owl. You are so silly.